thing is the immunity that everybody says, and nutrition has a lot of role in that. Everybody is using some or other nutrition intervention, whether he is diseased or not, during this crisis. And for whether we take this knee osteoarthritis, on which I have worked, polycystic ovarian disease, again on which I have been working, prolapse, urinary incontinence, or even menopause, the women health related issues, and obesity in general, blood pressure, diabetes, nutrition certainly has a role. And any patient of diabetes or hypertension, the standard advice is that before starting the medicine, at least 6 months should be given for lifestyle changes, of which nutrition has a major role. And I will end just whatever I want to say, that every region within India, northeast, southwest, every country, every part of the continent has its own kind of food material available, which is for thousands of years it has developed. So it is specific to the citizens or people of that area. And focus should be on utilizing that rather than going into the modern diet of refined food. And we are accustomed to use this kind of food, and to the extent possible, whatever natural way we can take that food, that is best for our health. And of course, since we are researcher, we have a tendency to prove that through evidence. What I'm trying to say is that it has been there in nature for thousands of years. But since we are scientists, we have a habit to, we don't believe anything unless we create evidence. So that be it. So all kind of scientists are here. So we create evidence, and ultimately I will say nothing new will emerge. The basic truth which has been there will only be reinforced by the research. The basic, let us go back to the basics and use whatever science we want to have to endorse that. And I think strongly, and we should propagate the good nutrition for maintenance and improvement of our health. Thank you. I think I wish success to this seminar. I feel and I hope that very good discussion will emerge out of that, and everybody will constructively contribute constructively for this furthering the cause of science in nutrition and related issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your best wishes and taking the projections regarding the nutritional research. Now we will move towards the first speaker of today's session is Dr. Robert Paul Friedland. He's at Department of Neurology, University of Louisville, Kentucky, USA. He is a clinical and research neurologist affiliated with multiple hospitals focused on clinical and biological issues in disorders. He is first to document patterns of abnormal brain metabolism using photon emission computed tomography. His team has discovered important Alzheimer's disease risk factor gene, SORAL1. He is also a visiting professor at Singa University of Medical Sciences, Japan. He has more than 200 scientific publications with over 14,000 citations to his credit. I am so honored, sir, to welcome you for today. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. I'm pleased to join you from Louisville, Kentucky. If I could have my slides.
Yes, sure.
And I'm pleased to support the comments of Professor Singh. I do believe nutrition is an important part of the coronavirus response. And there are really two parts to coronavirus. One is not getting it, and the other one is not having a excessive immune response. And you'll hear in a few moments how immunity is influenced very much by nutrition through influences of nutrition on intestinal bacteria. So it turns out that we are all home to several billion organisms, perhaps 1 to 2 kilograms of living bacteria. And the bacteria we have, which is called the microbiota, includes also viruses and other organisms, but they live in the gut and they influence the immune system because they are an enormous threat to our existence, and we evolved with them and they evolved with us. Could I have the next slide, please? This is the best example of this is the cows, because cows cannot digest grass. Cows can only eat grass because the difficult metabolic work is done by the bacteria they have in the gut. Other examples of their importance is the fact that human milk contains oligosaccharides that cannot be digested by the baby, but is food for the baby's bacteria. And in times of starvation, humans make sugars, protein sugars, called fucosylated proteins, which support the gut bacteria because it's so important, even in the face of starvation, for there to be an adequate bacterial population. Next slide, please. And this is our largest environmental exposure, as you see here on the right. A sneeze may be an exposure which can be, of course, especially now, be very important, but it only lasts for a few minutes if we're in the presence of someone sneezing. But our bacteria are with us at all times. All our ancestors had them going back the last 1 billion years. And they are completely hostile to what we eat. Hostage, I should say. They can only eat what we feed them. Next slide. It is something like the airport. This is just an analogy. The passengers are like the bacteria in the gut, and the police are like the immune system. We have to tolerate each other. Tolerance in the airport is critical. You don't make jokes with the police. You don't try to hold their gun or tell them stupid jokes. Similarly, the bacteria we have in the gut are developed by evolution to not excite the immune system and to make us tolerate them. This is just in order to show the very great importance of tolerance, the failure to mount an immune response, and not having too much immunity. And our nutrition affects that directly through the microbiota. Next slide, please. We have worked on this in regard to Alzheimer and Parkinson's, and the influence can be in the nose on the left, or in the mouth, or the gut. And they can go directly to the brain or to the spinal cord, which can influence Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or ALS, which is my my laboratory's research. But these organisms and interactions can involve other neurological phenomena such as autism and stroke. Next slide, please. The combined bacteria DNA, the combined bacteria of all the organisms is called the metagenome or the microbiome, and the organisms themselves are the microbiota. Next slide, please. And this interacts with genetics. Often geneticists imply that everything is genetic, but that is rarely true. Even a disease like mad cow disease, where the initiating agent is an infectious product found in food, susceptibility is caused by interaction with the genetic polymorphism, in this case, one in the prion protein. So you can't get mad cow disease if you don't have a certain gene. So there's possible interactions as well with nutrition and bacteria and genetics. Next slide. And the microbiota can involve COVID-19 because of the danger of having an excessive immune response. It turns out that anti-inflammatory Treg cells are made more in people who eat more fiber. I'll get to that in a moment, but it's a great oversimplification, but it's basically true. If you eat a lot of meat, you will have a relatively more inflammatory immune system in the body. And if you eat more fiber, and meat has no fiber, if you eat more fiber in fruit and vegetables, brown rice and whole grains, you have a more regulatory or anti-inflammatory immune system. And immunity is a component of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, heart disease, cancer, and stroke, and certainly other things that I don't have time to mention. Next slide. Another interaction with bacteria can be through the APOE gene for Alzheimer's disease, because I had proposed that it might influence the gene, it might influence the occurrence of the disease through an influence on gut bacteria. And this has now been shown in England that APOE genotype influences the bacteria, which might be the cause of the impact of the allele on pathology. Next slide. Diet is the main driver of microbiome variation. And I will give some recommendations. Next slide. That we can do gene therapy. I say that this is gene therapy in the kitchen because it's hard to change the human genome. It is becoming possible, but it's still difficult. But the metagenome, which is about 99% of the genes that we have in our body, the bacterial genes, we can adjust them or change them through diet with as little as 2 weeks, which can have consequences for inflammation, oxidative toxicity, and cancer, and perhaps a whole range of diseases. Next slide. We don't know what the best prebiotic or what the best probiotic might be. Certainly fiber is a valuable prebiotic, but which is best to take through food. And yogurt has bacteria which are probably beneficial. But there are many other ways that the bacterial content can be altered through medical foods, amyloid inhibitors such as polyphenols, vaccinations, but it's something everybody can do every day by altering diet. Next slide. Next. There is a paper just came out last week that shows green tea, which has many polyphenols that are very powerful, may impair amyloid aggregation and reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And here, there's an opportunity for a medication to work on the gut without entering into the brain or without entry into the blood. Next slide, please. An important component here, as I conclude, is fiber in fruit, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and brown rice, not juice, which has less fiber. And it's good to avoid saturated fat, sugar, salt, obesity, excessive alcohol, or white bread, which does not mean you can't eat any of these things. It's just, it's not good to have an excessive amount of salt or sugar. And to follow up a comment, component of important remarks of Professor Singh, who preceded me, it's possible interventions can be made that not only they don't cost anything, but they actually save money. So at least in some time, brown rice can be cheaper than white rice, although it's rather complicated now. I don't know if that's true in the United States, but brown rice has maybe 5 to 10 times more fiber than white rice. A great improvement in worldwide health would happen if people stopped drinking Coke or Pepsi. So there's a dietary intervention that wouldn't cost any money and would actually save several $billion. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, just consider the difference here between a typical American or a typical Indian meal. If this is a 16-ounce steak on the left, it has no fiber whatsoever. There's fiber on the right in the various vegetables and, of course, the dals and different beans. One cup of cooked kidney beans have about 10 grams of fiber, which is a lot. The other component I want to illustrate here is the great diversity of a vegetarian Indian meal shown on the right, compared to the American meal, which has one item. So we want to have a diverse bacterial population, which requires a diverse diet. And our ancestors who have been studied through work on hunter-gatherer populations that still exist today turn out to have an extraordinarily high intake of fiber and a high amount of diversity in their gut bacteria as well as in their diet. And it's believed that this is the lifestyle in which humans existed for several tens of thousands of years, that our genes are adapted for our life with this kind of a diet, not the kind of diet which you see on the left in this slide. And thank you very much for your attention. I will be very pleased to answer questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for explaining about the role of various nutritional components in regulating the gut microbiota